Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I'm really excited for this panel, Industry Insights from Transnational Players. And just to read, I think we touched about this on the plenary session about the importance of this topic right now. Just to read a little bit about the planet is on a verge of a revolution in commercial shipping. The revolution will usher in significant advances in efficiencies, reductions in carbon, the reach of vessels, the opening of economic opportunities, and a whole host of other areas. This panel will feature industry insiders who will reveal insights into where the market is going, the opportunities therein, and how established players can stay ahead of the curve. So I wonder who is first, but I can go ahead and introduce our speakers today. So um, Sophie Silvestri, am I saying that correctly? Silvestri in the back is Manager of Business Development and Government Affairs at Pasha Automotive Services, the operator of National City Marine Terminal at the Port of San Diego, and two other West Coast ports. She is Secretary of the Board for the Working Waterfront of San Diego, an advisory member of the South County Economic Development Council, and former board member and event chair of the National City Chamber of Commerce. She received her certification as an ESG practitioner and is a member of the American Association of Port Authorities. And before her role currently, she was Director of Operations for the San Diego Port Tenants Association, which is now Working Waterfront, a nonprofit representing businesses leasing from the San Diego Unified Port District. In that role, she administered a California Energy Commission grant for zero-emission equipment led by association and implemented by various industrial businesses within the port. She's also held positions in marketing and public relations in the hospitality industry and served as associate for the CEO of the World Trade Center San Diego, where she coordinated a bilateral investment exhibition in southern China. And we're also joined by Joseph Hudspeth, if I'm saying that correctly, with over 20 years of marine-related experience in sales, marketing, and product development. Joe is the Director of Business Development for Global Marine at BAE Systems Power and Propulsion Solutions. Joe has helped shape growth and business development in the maritime industry. Responsibilities have included management of sales and marketing programs, oversight of government contracting and coordination of corporate communication functions. With a background in marine propulsion systems and experience with fuel-efficient hull designs, Joe has been an invited speaker at several work, boat, and passenger ferry conferences. Joe has been featured as a boat-building columnist for Marine News magazine and writes about hybrid and electric propulsion technology. He currently serves as regional chairman for the Passenger Vessel Association, with regular participation on several committees and panels concerned with marine-related issues. And so with that, maybe I'm going to turn over, and do we have PowerPoints for this one? And so I'm maybe going to start with Sophie here for the first presentation for this panel today on this timely topic. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'll try to. Just the podium? That's okay? All right. Got it? Mm-mm. Well, while he's setting that up, it's nice to be with all of you. Again, Sophie with Pasha, and really an honor to be with you today. Clicking away. That's right. Yes. Yes, sir. All right, there we go. Okay, so thank you for listening to our panel today. I'm really excited to be here. Again, Sophie with Pasha. You guys may be familiar with the automotive processing terminal down in National City, just south of Naval Base San Diego. So we have a lot of divisions at Pasha. That's the one that I work for, Pasha Automotive Services. We're the ports terminal operator here, and we have other terminals up the state. So just give you a brief overview of who we are and how this is relevant to sustainable commercial shipping, both on the terminal side and on the shipping side. So we are a third-generation family-owned and operated company. The young gentleman you see in that photo is our current CEO. There's George 2, George 3, and George 4. Remember the name George 3. I'll talk about him again in a moment. We've been the terminal operator for the Port of San Diego since 1990, and the company itself celebrated 75 years of service this year. So we have various competencies. I'll talk about two of those today, as I said, both on the shipping side and on the automotive processing side. So Pasha, Hawaii are our Jones Act US flag fleet. We have 2 home-ported ships here in San Diego, and we just launched 2 of one in August and one again we'll have in January of this next year, LNG ships that are container servicing Hawaii. On the automotive side, we operate the marine terminal, as I said. It's a roll-on, roll-off operation. We have 13 different OEMs that we service in National City. And we have other competencies that makes us a fully global logistics and transportation company from end to end. So as I mentioned, Pasha Hawaii has the 2 new LNG vessels, and I'll talk about those again in a little bit, but just keep that in mind because this is how we believe that we're contributing to sustainable commercial shipping. And you can't have sustainable commercial shipping without the cooperation of terminals and ports, right? They go hand in hand. Because where do ships go? They go to terminals. So I'll talk about the sustainable terminal operations first. So these are just 2 overviews of National City Marine Terminal. You see a sea of cars there. We're in the regulatory environment, of course. We're a business in California and an industrial business at that. So we have a lot of responsibility and we have a lot of enthusiasm around a lot of these subjects because there's some excitement in what we can do to contribute to reducing emissions at ports. So, of course, you're probably familiar with the at-berth regulation amendment that the California Air Resources Board has implemented. Our vessel type that visits the facility there are, as I said, RoRo, roll-on, roll-off. Those will come under regulation in 2025. So what are we doing? We're working with the Port of San Diego, who's our landlord. There are various ways that you can comply with this. One of those is shore power. We'll have at least 1 plug at the terminal. And then when vessels are retrofitted, they can, of course, plug in and save those emissions at berth. Another way that we can do that is with a bonnet. So if a vessel is not scheduled for dry dock right away to get that retrofit, or if it's not within their budget for another few years, but the regulation's already happening, the capture and control system can help to reduce the emissions at berth by capturing those emissions and really provide that Band-Aid between the 2025 deadline and then when vessels can all be plugging in. We also have some other innovative concepts we're working on. Those could be battery storage, which will relieve some of the pressure off the grid, as well as hydrogen fuel cells that, if a vessel is retrofitted, could conceivably plug in to a hydrogen fuel cell as well. So the Port of San Diego has what they call the Maritime Clean Air Strategy. It's a guidance document that is where they're working with the businesses and the community as a kind of a subset of the Assembly Bill 617 for portside communities to be more involved in helping reduce emissions in those disadvantaged communities. And so that document, you may be familiar with it, but that is providing a lot of guidance for us and as we move forward into reducing emissions. And a clean transportation is very important at the facility. So these are just a few things that we've done in addition to all of this sustainable commercial shipping and terminal operations to ensure that we're continuing to reduce emissions. They all go together. You know, you gotta tackle everything that you can when you can. Take advantage of funding. So with help from the state of California, we've been able to deploy 3 electric drayage trucks, some forklifts, and other equipment that really helps the terminal continue to be sustainable. So I told you to remember the name George 3. As I said, Pasha is a family company. So we were the very first company to launch a pure truck and car carrier under the United States Jones Act. For anyone that's not familiar with the Jones Act, it's a 1920 federal statute that protects merchant marine jobs. It means that a ship that goes between ports in the U.S. has to be American built, it has to be owned by a U.S. company, and it has to have a U.S. crew. So George 3 is the first of 2 liquefied natural gas container ships that Pasha has launched to join the fleet of Hawaii ships that we have. The first one was the Jean Ann, named after the Pasha family grandmother. Her sister ship followed about a decade later, and she's a Conroe, so a combination of container and ro-ro. And then we acquired Horizon Lines and then built these 2 ships. So growing the fleet, growing it sustainably. The Pasha family keeps it, they keep it in the family. They name their ships after their family members. And we definitely made a commitment to Hawaii a long time ago when we started servicing that trade that we would set the bar for environmental sustainability. So are we at zero emissions? Not quite, but this LNG, you'll be impressed with the reductions that we're getting. We've exceeded the IMO standards. So 0 sulfur emissions, 90% reduced nitrogen oxide and 25% reduced carbon dioxide. Those are what we're seeing so far with this first LNG ship and the other one that will follow and add to the fleet in January. How did we do that with LNG? So we created a joint venture. Pasha Hawaii Clean Marine Energy and World Fuel Services created a joint venture called West Coast Clean Fuels. In Central California, the liquefied natural gas is created, and we have trucks that are also operated on natural gas that transport that LNG to the terminal, and they shuttle them into the terminal, and then via skid, they will bunker the vessel right there. This happens in Long Beach. So the containers that we operate, the container ships we operate are in Long Beach. They go Long Beach, Oakland, Hawaii. That's that 14-day loop. And just to end on some of our other things that we've been doing, scrubbers. We were able to put some scrubbers into the Jean Ann. This is our 2005 very first ship ever launched under the Jones Act. So she still operates, in the traditional sense, but the scrubbers and soon a retrofit for shore power will make her a very clean ship that visits the port of San Diego. Here, you'll recognize that beautiful skyline. This is one of the vessels that calls on a biweekly basis here in San Diego. There's a replica of her at the Maritime Administration because she was that very first ship built under the Jones Act of her kind. So I think that one of the things that where we Pasha can make an impact in sustainable commercial shipping is you can't just do one. You got to do that. You have that terminal side and the shipping side, and so we are fortunate enough to operate both, so we can share our resources, our enthusiasm, and help work with the port and the state and others on these initiatives so that we can all make a better future. And that concludes my presentation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Hudspeth, and thank you, Trey, for having me as part of this panel, and thank you to Matt for the invitation as well. Pleased to speak this morning, and perfect, got it all queued up here. Just want to walk through a couple of slides and talk to you in kind of a complementary fashion to what Sophie already spoke about, and we'll talk a little bit about some power and propulsion solutions for all of the other vessels and craft that help us get to a greener and sustainable BlueTech future. And so, let's got the clicker here. Perfect. When people think about BAE systems, you might be wondering, what does a defense company have to do with the blue economy? And to be honest, BAE systems is so much more than just in the defense side. We do have a shipyard here in San Diego. Encourage you all to visit that facility. It's a beautiful facility. But we also specialize in electric solutions, and in particular, delivering power and propulsion solutions for getting people towards zero emissions. That is one of our charges, and it's important, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that today. So to kick off, it's important to know what is possible. You know, for years, we've been talking about the future and what's to come. Well, I think it's safe to say the future is now. We do have to be taking action, and you know, California is certainly leading the charge with actual policy and having operators get involved and get to zero emissions sooner rather than later. And so we're going to be talking about some of the solutions that are available. And when we do that, it's important to not only focus on what's happening here in America, but the global economy. And I do want to take a moment to talk about some of the solutions that can be employed in a variety of vessel applications. So today, my talk will really be focusing on more of the harbor craft, getting those shipped goods the last few miles to their destination. Because in reality, there's more vessels that come in contact with those containers or even trucks or port equipment then that's going to produce emissions on a massive scale. And so it's important that we address that problem as well and not overlook it. So we'll be talking about a variety of those technologies. Those technologies include hybrid, which we're all familiar with if you've seen a Prius driving down the street. We'll be talking about full electric with batteries. We'll be talking about a parallel hybrid system, and that's one that employs a variety of solutions, including diesel propulsion and hybrid and electric as well. And then we'll get to kind of ways of the future, touching on hydrogen fuel cell technology. So I put this chart up because many of you are familiar with diesel electric propulsion. Joe, you say that's not a new technology. Why are you showing it? The important thing here is diesel electric technology has advanced. We're now using it in a hybrid fashion, so we're employing the use of batteries and as energy storage to help get us to zero emissions. But one of the things I wanted to point out is we've changed how we approach looking at diesel power generation. And so we're not using just conventional diesel generators anymore. We're using variable speed generators. And by using variable speed generators, we actually control how much fuel we use. And when we do burn fuel, we're burning in a more efficient fashion. So it really is helping to cut down on emissions even when we have to use carbon fuels. Certainly, it's nice to go to all electric. And the difference here between those two slides is simply the lack of power generation from a diesel generator and adding more batteries. Why do I show this? Well, it's important to know that not everyone can get to zero emissions right away. So they may need to start out with a hybrid-based solution. And then as their shoreside infrastructure is built up, they can remove those diesel generators, add more batteries, and go all electric. Also want to point out, again, for applications such as harbor tugs, those vessels need a lot of power, and it's hard for them to have all of that power on board in the form of energy storage and batteries. And so going with a parallel system might be a better way to go. Again, we're thinking on a global perspective here, and not everyone has a large shoreside infrastructure for charging. So having those diesel engines on board might be actual part of the solution. But when they're doing all of that loitering or low speed station keeping, they should be able to do that emissions free and all electric. And that's where the batteries do come into play. The nice thing about using technology like this is you may not even need a generator. I do show a generator in the graphic here, but it is possible to even harness some of the residual power of that diesel engine and recharge the batteries that can be used for later on doing that loitering and station keeping. And then, of course, as Sophie even mentioned, getting to the future, we'll be looking to other solutions such as hydrogen fuel cells. And I'll be talking about that in a moment. One thing from a global perspective, and as far as flattening the curve, lowering the hurdle that's important, is we need people, operators, to want to embrace zero emissions technology. And in order to do that, it can't be a challenging, cumbersome operation. In fact, operating a conventional vessel should essentially be the same as operating in a hybrid vessel. When you go and rent a car today and they hand you the keys to an electric vehicle, you don't have to go through a training session to operate that vehicle and have special skill sets. And so the same should be applied when it comes to embracing low and zero emissions technologies for our vessels. The bar needs to be set pretty low. It needs to be intuitive and have that same sort of feel and operation as a conventional vessel. And to make that simpler too, employing things like telematics is really important so that we can keep track of how the vessel is being operated, the emissions that are being saved, and if there is any challenges or errors that occur in the system, those can be quickly diagnosed from a digital perspective. One of the beauties of going to electric propulsion is there's no wrenches to turn. It's all digital technology, and we can very quickly source any sort of fault and troubleshoot that. We also want to talk a little bit about autonomy and automation of these vessels. And one of the things that was mentioned this morning, I think, in the talks was about autonomy. And I'll be getting into that in a second. But one of the things you can do is set up geofencing or eco-friendly zones. And so anytime a vessel transits into an eco-sensitive area, the vessel automatically resorts to its zero-emission technology using batteries or hydrogen fuel cells. And just to give you a couple of real practical examples of where this technology is being employed, here in the US, we're doing things like short sea shipping of refrigerated cargo, all electric. This vessel operates in Long Island Sound and delivers fresh meats and produce across the Sound with emissions free. And it's important to know that we're actually taking on-road transportation off the road and moving these goods and cargo via the sea. Why would we want to do that? Well, if you think about the global point of view, we're actually reducing wear and tear on the roads, which is diesel producing or diesel consuming construction equipment. You know, our oceans are highways that don't need to be paved. They don't need to be maintained. We do need to be good stewards, but it's something to keep in mind that very practically you can take some of that land-based cargo and move it back to the sea and help reduce emissions that way. Also, this is a project that we happen to be working on in the UK, where we are using autonomy and zero emissions technology to move actually rubbish, in this case, on the Thames River. And it's a pilot project that we're doing, and we're hoping that the lessons learned from this project can be employed elsewhere. But again, going to a fully autonomy operated vessel with zero emissions technology is kind of the way of the future, and we're doing it now. And then lastly, this is a technology that is coming out of Australia from Boundary Layer Technology. They're moving goods and services all electric, emissions free at a higher speed form and getting them to their final destination. And I'm really excited about what they're doing and can't wait to actually see one of these vessels built and demonstrated. So again, just a quick snapshot. The future is now. We can get our hovercraft and some of these final vessels or final trucks and port cargo or port equipment. We can get those to zero emissions with using the same sort of systems and technology that I've shown you today. I do want to wrap up here with just talking about some challenges and then what's new and innovative. Really what's new and innovative is being able to control all of these vessels and their systems all electrically. And in order to do that, it used to be that you had to have a series of complex boxes and inverters, converters, frequency drives, stuff that I don't even always understand myself. But you know, the nice thing about the improved technology is we've really simplified it. And so we took what used to take multiple units, we've compressed that into small modular slice technologies. And so what that allows us to really do is free up more space and weight in these vessels and use more batteries or zero emissions technology rather than having larger fuel tanks on board. And we can control things like pumps and winches and refrigerated reefer containers, or bow thrusters, etc. All of those aspects can now be controlled electrically and emissions-free simply by adding an appropriate slice into the small system. And we want to keep these systems small and not complex so that they can be employed on a global basis. Getting to the future, hydrogen fuel cells. This vessel will be coming to San Francisco shortly. It's fully constructed, gone through the U.S. Coast Guard inspection process, and it employs hydrogen fuel cell. It'll be the first hydrogen fuel cell operating vessel in America. So for us, this is a big deal. Elsewhere, around the world, hydrogen fuel cell technology is also rolling out. So we're pretty excited about this. Again, leverages that same sort of simplified system to get people to zero emissions. Lastly, I'll just mention some of the challenges, and this is the part where people like Trey and the governments can really come in and help out. One of the things we know is the shoreside infrastructure still needs to be built up. For some reason, people decided that power and or electricity and water are not the best of friends, and so we don't have all the power necessary that we need at the docks to recharge all electric vessels. So that's something that we do need to improve upon, and it's going to take some capital investment to make that happen and boost up the infrastructure. Likewise, if we talk about hydrogen fuel cell technology, where's that hydrogen being produced? How is it going to get to the vessel? And so those are some conversations that we need to have, and maybe we'll have in the dialogue following the presentation here. And then lastly, capital to build these vessels and implement the technology is important. They do come at a premium, although the benefits are there not only tangibly in terms of environmental stewardship, but they are there fiscally. There is a return on this investment. And so we hope that together we can keep moving forward. And again, we're excited that the future is now. So thank you very much.
Great. So I have a lot of questions, but I'm gonna hop in. I actually think that, you know, what you said at the last point about what we're investing in California, I just wanted to bring it up just so I can read aloud some of the investments that we have coming on, specifically in the space of the transition. I think I mentioned we have over 10 billion in 3 years for ZEV, but we have 1 billion for drayage trucks and infrastructure, 2 billion for clean trucks and other heavy-duty ZEVs, 400 million for heavy-duty ZEVs at ports, 45 million for near-zero heavy-duty trucks, 250 million for zero-emission vehicle manufacturing grants for heavy-duty, and then 60 million for hydrogen infrastructure. That's just for ZEV, and then 8.1 billion over 5 years for energy grid reliability and clean energy investments, including 295 million for demand-side grid support, which I think is one thing that the ports have been talking a lot about. You're right, we have a lot of funds for the space, but we're going to need probably more. I think the transition is going to be very challenging. And, you know, I think that was maybe one thing that I wanted to talk about is you mentioned kind of the infrastructure from both of your perspective. Is how challenging is the infrastructure piece? What are the most challenging parts of infrastructure? Is it utility interconnection? Is it local permitting? Is it state regulation? I think I hear across the board that the infrastructure for charging or for hydrogen fueling is one of the biggest challenges. So maybe just for each of you to speak about what are the biggest challenges with the infrastructure you face at the local level?
I can start. I think all of those, really. I mean, the infrastructure at the terminal, it takes a lot of planning. Operationally, it takes a lot of permitting. There are multiple different jurisdictions that need to permit and work with the utility company. And also, you know, it's just, are we going to have, you know, brownouts and blackouts, and what's the backup there too? Because we're putting all of this money into the terminal via grants, and Port of San Diego is investing in that. And we also want to look at and see, are there ways that we can put renewable into that as well? Have some solar or wind energy that can potentially fund this, because we'll have one shore power plug, for example, by 2024. And I'm looking at Zach back there. He knows, but probably within the next 10 years, like, we're going to probably need 4 more. We have 5 berths at the terminal. And so as more vessels get retrofitted and need to plug in, powering 3-4 vessels at a time, you know, that's a lot of strain on the grid. So what can we do now to look at the infrastructure, not just on the utility side and the permitting, but in the future of how we can incorporate renewable into this so that we have reliability and resilience in that sense as well.
Yeah, I agree. That's definitely part of the problem. I would say also some of the challenges that we're also trying to overcome is simple things, as Sophie mentioned, getting the power from the grid onto the vessel. And many of the applications that I work with, including things like vessels like ferries, they're only at the dock for a limited amount of time. And so time is precious. And so you not only do you have to figure out how to get that power on board, but do it in a quick fashion. And so we're looking at technologies that are fully automated, including the use of robotics to handle this cabling equipment and make the connection safely to get that power on board. And then just to complement what Sophie was saying, as far as avoiding a drain on the grid and causing any sort of brownout, there is some ways to think about that. And that might be using things like methanol reformers on the land side to convert methanol to hydrogen that can then be used through a fuel cell and produce power. That can be used in a more rapid deployment rather than waiting for the grid to be bolstered in a fashion to handle all of that power. Secondly, you can also use containerized battery solutions where you're trickle charging those batteries and even taking advantage of off-peak charging times from the grid and using that energy storage to then recharge your vessel.
It's funny you say that last one. I've just actually spoke with a company that's up in the high desert. They take 20-foot TEUs and they literally outfit them with old Tesla car batteries and then just make it a massive battery and do exactly what you're saying, have it trickle in the grid to be able to do that like quick on demand supply into the resource. And that gets a good point. You talked about like, just the speed at which some vessels need to turn. And I think that's lent a lot of discussion in the space, at least from what I've seen. We just launched an effort in Long Beach for a hydrogen hub called Arches. And if anyone is interested in it, I encourage visiting archesh2.org. So that is our hydrogen hub effort here in California. We announced at the Port of Long Beach. You kind of talked about hydrogen as opportunity. I think that a lot of people think, with zero emission vehicle transition, they think immediately battery technology because they're thinking about their cars. But in a space like maritime, do you see more applicability with a space like hydrogen, and what are those reasons why?
Yeah, in the maritime sector, we're very excited about the use of hydrogen because it allows us to have zero emissions capability for longer range applications. Typically, an electrically powered vessel is going to need to come back to a point of charging. Those are A to A routes. They don't necessarily always work for A to B routes because you have to have the charging infrastructure on both sides. And so that's double the amount of expense and investment. But hydrogen fuel cell is something that you can operate more conventionally, whereas you size your tanks to handle the route that the vessel is going to operate on. And I did want to circle back to one thing you said, Trey, about the Tesla batteries and the containers. A lot of people ask me, they're like, well, Joe, if we invest in these batteries, what is the end of life for these batteries? I don't want all these batteries that you put on a vessel to go into a landfill. And one of the encouraging things is after the useful life of a battery on board a vessel, they can go into secondary applications such as containerized storage. Whereas they may not be still healthy enough to operate and power a vessel, they're still plenty healthy and safe to operate in an energy storage containerized solution. So there is a secondary market.
And just to add to that, on the hydrogen piece, I think there are also, when I talked about, the strain on the grid, when we look at some of these innovative companies that are coming out with ideas like the hydrogen fuel cell inside one of those containers that can make a mobile solution. This is an example of how you kind of have to, you get to skip that infrastructure and the permitting. If it's a mobile, there's of course permitting involved, but you're not trenching and, digging up the terminal and putting it back together to be able to power a ship. If you have something that's mobile, not all ships are the same size. They don't all have the same plugs on the, port side, starboard, right? They're all different ways that you can find yourself in a challenging situation when you're trying to do this new thing of cold ironing. And so that hydrogen fuel cell idea, and I shouldn't call it an idea, but this innovative concept that is coming forward by multiple different entities that are really exploring this. It's really exciting because it gives us another opportunity to comply. It gives us flexibility at the terminal, and vessels, don't have to have one solution.
And for your space as like a company, I've only recently learned just how dramatic emissions reduction of being able to plug in shoreside power is. Can you just speak to just how important that is, for example, in terms of instead of just the vessel just running on a generator? I mean, the game changer in the amount of emissions, I'm sure, is dramatic.
Yeah, the game changer is dramatic. I mean, you think about if you're discharging cars from a vessel, so the auxiliary engines are having to run because you have to have airflow. People, you have cars that are turned on inside of a ship. Imagine a large parking garage is just floating in the water. So you got to have your auxiliary engines running with all your fans. So being able to turn that off, and especially because we're next to a disadvantaged community that has suffered air pollution for decades, right? It's going to make a huge impact in terms of being able to plug in at birth. It's challenging, but it's necessary.
You brought up another good point there, which I think was like community engagement around these new technologies and being able to share, their ability to lower emissions in services areas, especially in areas where we've had a lot of large industrial challenges in the past with those communities. Maybe you can speak a little bit about the community engagement that you have all done at the local level with your projects in reducing emissions. That would be great.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I can give you one example that was a great effort that we did back. It started in 2016. It was the California Energy Commission grant that we won. It was back when I was in my previous role, but Pasha was an involved end user. So there were 3 different cities within the port of San Diego, National City, and Chula Vista, various businesses, BAE included, that got zero emission equipment to help reduce emissions at their operations at the port. And the community involvement with that was vital to the success of the grant. Not only were they there to support the grant, write letters of support, give input on what type of vehicles and cargo handling equipment they believe would make the most impact, and just the jobs that it created, but also just seeing that if we can all work together on something and make something great out of it was just from end to end a really good story, I would say, on how involving the community from the start can really make a great project. And so that's one example. I'm out in the community a lot. I mean, that's part of my job in government affairs. And so just listening and understanding what the community is looking for, and also being able to explain and have that engagement. You were saying earlier, batteries kind of is like the first assumption. People say electric trucks. Let's change that to zero emission, because sometimes you see a trucker that, might come here once and, then they're, in the Midwest or on the East Coast for the next 6 months, and they're not coming back to the port of San Diego. They're not going to buy an electric truck because there's not enough infrastructure for them to have that flexibility to go all over the country. Not yet. Maybe hydrogen has better range, and then they could feel more comfortable with adopting that first because of the range that you get out of a hydrogen fuel cell. So those are other things that's just a good opportunity to engage the community and explain the difference between those two.
Joe, I actually really liked the one picture that you had of was it in Long Island, the boat that was going back with the zero emission? I think that we've thought about this a lot in California. I don't know if anyone has ever been to the port of West Sacramento or the port of Stockton. We have 2 inland ports. We have 2 large riverways, the San Joaquin River and the Sacramento River. I've always thought about that too, just less pressure on the road. I know that we've done a study about the viability of those routes and using either barges or combination of hydrogen fuel cell related vessels to bring some of those products down the river. Is there any other places other in the world that have lent to that space? I know that you had the Long Island example there of moving cargo back and forth across, but any riverways, is there any countries or specific vessels that you have that are looking to do that with cargo elsewhere?
I also gave the example on the Thames River in the UK. It's still early days, and we're trying to get people to embrace this technology. So certainly we're growing applications for this. Another place where we're seeing a lot of interest is actually coming from the oil and gas industry. They do a lot of barge movements of crude oil, especially on the intercoastal waterways, not only in the Gulf, but also the eastern seaboard in those protected waterways. And those vessels are operating in people's literal backyards. And those are where we want to keep the emissions out. And so we're now seeing that these vessels, these tugs and long haul towing vessels can employ emissions reduction and even zero emissions technology by having one of those barges be batteries or a fuel cell, et cetera, to power the vessel. And so we're definitely seeing a push in a movement for these technologies to be embraced. And one of the beauties, I guess, the silver lining of COVID is when you had a lot of that vessel traffic slow down, we actually saw bluer skies, and communities were changed because simply there wasn't the amount of traffic that was existing pre-COVID. And so that set us up for the mentality of we need to make a difference. We can see what a little bit of change can effect in the environment. And so now we need to use technologies to help us to have a sustainable life with the amount of traffic that's necessary to keep goods flowing, but do it in a more greener fashion.
That's super important because, I mean, I think the one thing that people think about when they're like, why would I, the first point comes to point of price, in shipping. It's sometimes I'm a farmer in the Central Valley and it's probably maybe cheaper just for me to invite a truck and to take whatever I'm doing rather than go to the port of West Sacramento and then utilize some vessel to take it down. But we've also seen that congestion happen at our ports to where the price differential now may be different because they're saying, I don't want to go through a situation where my ag product is, stuck in traffic or due to supply chain swell. What are my alternatives? I really like the idea of utilizing, you're right, you made a great example. They're not roads that are being hit by the pavement. It's literally, we have a river that takes us right to the bay. So how do we utilize that in space to do it here? I want to open up, does anyone else have questions from the audience here for our panelists?
Mike Forward, Philip, just a quick one. Have you seen any resistance from the communities, from the various areas to adopting this technology just by virtue of, is there a cost impact on us? What does this really bring you to? Do they believe in that clean initiative, or are they just, oh, well, it works fine, why do we have to change?
Yes, I think, especially for most of the maritime industry, people don't want to invest in something unless the regulatory environment forces them down that path. That's why right now, according to the EPA, we're capped out at Tier 4 emissions, and no one is going beyond that. Or if people can avoid Tier 4, they do avoid Tier 4. And that's kind of the wrong mindset. We do need to be better stewards of our environment and be looking at the future. Most of my customers, I call them eco-pioneers because they're people who are choosing to go down a path and they want to set the example. And the bottom line is not what they're looking at initially. They're doing it for the cause first, but what we're finding is that there is a positive impact to the bottom line. One of the things that people totally forget is the maintenance costs are completely reduced. The time that you spent fueling your vessel, who calculates how much time and labor is involved with fueling their vessel? All of that goes away if you're simply having even a robot plug in your vessel to charge. That's all gains that can be realized. So we do have to look at the total cost of ownership.
I would just add to that in terms of looking at the total cost. So, for example, the LNG container ships that Pasha just built, one launched and one coming, $225 million per ship. That's not just pocket change, right? That took a lot of investment, a lot of planning. We were happy to do it though because there were other ways that we knew that we were going to benefit. Where the fuel costs are skyrocketing right now. I was looking at just a charter price for a RoRo, an international carrier RoRo vessel, $125,000 a day, right? I mean these are insane prices. So luckily we signed contracts with the shipyard in Brownsville, Texas in 2017. If we tried to build that ship today, it would be closer to $300 million. But where I was going with this is there were other aspects where we knew we would be saving. So the LNG fueling, where we have some control over that with our joint venture. It's one of the most hydrodynamic vessels in the world for its kind because of the way that we built it. It wasn't just an off-the-shelf design. It's wider and shorter. It's 774 feet. And there are other ways where we knew that we would be saving. And so I think looking at the whole picture like that, not to mention with other things with the terminal sustainability initiatives, funding from the government to help close that gap are vital. I think that's where it's really a key partnership with the state and with the federal government, even local initiatives that to help pay for infrastructure and other things like that to make it affordable.
Any other questions from folks in the audience for our panelists? Well, I think I'm going to kind of do maybe similar to what I did last panel, which is maybe think about, we're here at the end of the year, we're going into 2023. What are you most, I guess, excited for in this space? Where do you think the biggest challenge is? Maybe just for the next year. Maybe I'll start with you, Joe.
Yeah, for me, what I'm most excited about is now we have ways to help get people to zero emissions. They don't have to jump all in and go all electric or straight to a fuel cell. There are some simpler solutions and ways to employ technology that's available today to have people start reducing their emissions. So that's what I'm most excited about, even starting next year. Again, on the challenge side, there are some conversations that we need to have as far as bringing hydrogen to the ports, beefing up port infrastructure for the charging solutions. Again, some of this involves literally tearing apart a terminal facility to get the cable connections made. And that can be a long and laborious process when it does come to environmental studies and permitting, et cetera. But the end goal is all for the good. And so I'm hoping that we can jump over some of those hurdles.
I'm most excited about exploring a lot of the renewable opportunities that we have going on right now. I know that the port is eagerly awaiting some renewable proposals that our company has for National City Marine Terminal with both wind and solar to help us continue to be, I want to be able to come back here and next year, the year after, and say we're the most sustainable ro-ro operation in the world. That would be really, really cool to be able to say. And working that angle. There's so many things that we can do. It's just we have to be strategic and we have to plan for it.
Great. Well, that was awesome. I feel like I learned a lot in that panel. This is part of my job. I need to be learning this more. So exactly. So I want to thank our panelists here. I think we're here at the end of the hour. So thank you so much. And then an applause for the panelists.